In this video, we're going to review the order by clause as part of the SQL query. Up in the top right, you'll see the query that we've been reviewing throughout our introduction to the other clauses, the select and from clauses specifically. You'll see the order by clause is the last clause in this query, and right here it says or reads order by city. So what it's telling SQL to do is basically order the output. I can't say it enough. Order the output according to the values in the field city, and then the default is ascending order. So for example, you have two records. One, the city name is Albany. The other, the city name is Cincinnati. SQL will explicitly order those results or sort them according to the value for city. So the record with the city Albany is going to display first before the record for Cincinnati. And again, that's assuming the ascending the sort order, which is default. Just to review or to confirm what your assumptions are around ascending order, we're really talking about lowest number to highest number for numeric data. So a negative 1,000 comes before a positive 1,000. A 1 comes before a 1,000. And then talking through A to Z, 4 character data. So you're like in the example that I just gave, the city of Albany is going to come before Cincinnati. The name Adam is going to come before Matt, and etc. And then when you're talking through dates, right, because you can sort by dates as well, you're talking about oldest to newest. So January 1st, 2008 would come before January 1st, 2009, or December 2nd, 2008. And then the ascending order would essentially be the opposite of all for each case that I described. And you can, in SQL, specify descending sort order with the DESC keyword, short for descending, after the field name. So if we wanted to sort in this query here, if we want to sort by descending order, we would put the DESC or the descending keyword after the field city. The last thing about the order by clause in SQL is SQL does support multi-level sorts, which really means you're sorting on more than one field. So for example, you might sort records first by state, and so you'll have a group of records for Ohio, you'll have a group of records for Kentucky, a group of records for New York, etc. But within those records, right, the records for Ohio, for example, you might want to sort by city. So for the records with Ohio, you would put they all start with C, the ones that I'm coming with, but you would put Cincinnati ultimately before Toledo. Right, if you were sorting in ascending order, a city in ascending order as the level 2 sort for that for that example. And then just to talk through one other thing, and then we're going to dive into SQL pretty quickly, because order by is the shortest and probably the easiest to understand clause. With column aliases, because the filtering criteria is applied to output from the query, it's not executed on the table source or the original underlying data in your from clause. This means a few things. First, column aliases from the select list are supported in the order by clause because those column aliases are ultimately displayed in your output. Second, the order by clause is the only clause that supports column aliases because it's the only clause that is applied to output from the query versus working on the table source, the original underlying data. So the where clause and the group by clause do not support column aliases because they're ultimately operating on the original data, in which case those column aliases don't exist in the original table. And then, why does this matter? You can always use field names from the original table, but you can use aliases that you've defined in the select list, which is useful when you have more complicated elements within that select list. such as concatenation across multiple fields. So you're an item in your select list, with all the examples we've been working with, they're just fields typically, but you can ultimately modify an element in the select list by pulling together values from different fields, etc. And so, when your select element or your element in your select list gets to be 2 lines long, it might not be as easy to read or as elegant to put that full modification or that full element in the order by clause, and instead the alias name is a lot simpler. And a lot cleaner, easier to read. So just to walk through this example, we're telling SQL to select the first 1,000 records for the field address ID, state province ID, city from the address table within the person schema. We do provide an alias, a column alias for state province ID, and then also a column alias for the city field, and we're changing those to state code and city name respectively. Then we put an order by clause after from, and the order by is going to be the last clause in your query. You're going to have order by state province ID and city name, and then with the DESC keyword. So what does this mean? Well, first we'll handle the sort. So the sort is telling you sort first by state in ascending order. So this is the example that we used with, Ohio is going to come Ohio is going to come before. I said it again. Ohio is going to come before Virginia. Okay, so that would be ascending order for its state province ID, and then within each one of those states, for unique unique values within state province ID, we're going to then sort by city. But we're going to sort in descending order. So for Ohio as a state, we would put Toledo before Cincinnati. So that's descending, Z to A. So that's the sort. That's what we're telling SQL to do through the clause. You'll see that we, in terms of the field names, we specified state province ID for the first element in the sort. We could have supplied a column alias here, state code. We didn't, and that's perfectly fine. And then in the second second level of the sort, we supplied city name as the field, which ultimately refers to the column alias from the original field city within the person.address table. And that could be, you could change that to city. We have city name here without any quotations. It could be city name with single quotations, or it could be city name with enclosed within brackets. And the same goes ultimately for state province ID as well. So we're going to kick over to SQL Server Management Studio to see these examples in practice. So again, setting my current database to AdventureWorks 2019. You can see that it's displayed as the current database in the drop down. And we'll just work through some examples in ascending sort order. So first, I want to show you what does the output look like without a sort. So we're selecting the first 50 records for the field's address ID and city in the person.address table. So when we run that, you'll see that the address ID kind of has these numbers. There's no sort right to the output. There's SQL ran the query and determined its own path to supply the output that you see here, and we didn't specify. We didn't tell SQL to do anything differently. And so in the second query, we're ultimately going to tell SQL to order the output or the results by the field city, and then that's in ascending order because we didn't specify differently, and ascending is the default sort order. So when we run this, we're going to see ultimately different records returned because these are going to be the first 50 alphabetically records in this table. For the field city. So we see Abingdon, Albany, right, Alexandria. So this is A to Z sorting on the field city. And then if we were to drop down and add the state province ID field to our query, or to our select list, and then order by that field in ascending order, we'll ultimately see different records returned, right? And the state province ID, the first or the smallest value of state province ID is going to be displayed first, which is 1 in this particular data set. So if you scroll down, continue to scroll down, we'll see that we have multiple cities, right? And for the first state, it must be, or province really, it's somewhere in Canada. We see Calgary and Edmonton as 2 different cities that both share the value of 1 for state province ID. And so a multi-level sort, right, if we sorted on state province ID and then city, would ultimately return the same number of records for 1, right? State province ID is still going to be at the top, but the records within those records will ultimately be resorted for the level 2 sort, which is on city. And so all based on the city names I see here, you're going to see Calgary for all records, and then you're going to see for the first records, and then you're going to see Edmonton at the end. So we'll run this query to show a multi-level sort. And so what did SQL do? It did as expected. State province ID is going to be in the same order as it was in the prior query. It's just records within those distinct values are now reshuffled or reordered, sorted by city name. And so we go down the list, right? We see that C precedes Edmonton, or E, the letter E, Birmingham for state province ID 3. Birmingham comes before Florence, comes before Huntsville, comes before Mobile, and it's all in alphabetical order. So that is really the multi-level sort, all using the default sort order in SQL, which is ascending. So now we're going to cover some examples that use the descending sort order by specifying the descending keyword. And so that comes after the field name within the sort. And this time I'm selecting the top 100 records because to have some more heterogeneity in the output, and you'll see why in a second. Ultimately because well, when we get down actually further, it's the state province ID that's the issue, not necessarily the city. Although you can see here we have only 2 with the top first 100 records. We only have 2 different values for the field city. But you'll notice that this is in descending sort order. So Z comes before Y, comes before X, etc., all the way down throughout the output for the number of records that you specify. And so that would be descending sort order on the field city. And then going to the next query where we add in the state province ID field and then also sort by it in descending order, you'll see ultimately that we see different records from what we saw above. So your state province ID of 181 followed by 180. So this is in descending order, right? So we're going from largest to smallest. So we'll see 179, possibly. Yep. And so that's it for the top 100 records. You'll also see that the city, right, there's only one value for the city. There's only one value for city for the state province ID equal to 181. And so that's why I ultimately included more records in these examples, because it takes getting down to state province ID of 179 before there are more than one unique value for the field city. And so when we do a multi-level sort, that's when it becomes important. If we do a multi-level sort on state province ID and then city, and city also in descending sort order here, we'll see that these records for the state province ID of 179 ultimately get reshuffled to show city values for the city and descending sort order, which means from Z to A. And so if we run this query, all right, the records aren't really going to change for they might ultimately be reshuffled because SQL might take a different path to provide this output versus what we saw in the previous one. But it's not shuffled as a result of values in the field city until we get down to the field or the value 179 for state province ID, in which case we will see that it's sorted in descending sort order. So T comes I'm not sure. Oh, that's pretty good. So let me expand this out again. So what happened was that the let's just run the first query. I'll leave this in the video because I'm not. It's good to walk through or talk through why that was different, right? So when I ran the first, select the first 100 records. Ordering by state province ID in descending order, you'll see that because we didn't tell SQL how to sort the field city, we ultimately saw various values for state province ID 179. And so some of those include, I'm not French, so I'm not going to get any of these names right? But Bobigny and Drancy, right? So these are there are multiple values for the field city, and so it starts with record number 63 to the end 100. And so if we let's just look at that same query that I had originally. If we look at that and we go down, so you ultimately see that values for the letter T, which is the last value for city alphabetically, are now displayed first because of descending sort order. And so there are more than however many it is, 37 or 38 records that have that value. So that's the only distinct value for the field city that we end up seeing. And so if I were to expand this out a little bit more, right, I'm not sure at what point we'll start to see new values, but we will at some point. So right around record 119, we see that after records with this value for the field city are put at the top, then we start to see the other cities come through and be displayed in the output in descending sort order. And then last example here, last example for the descending sort order is we're ultimately going to sort first by state province ID in descending sort order, and then city in ascending state order, or in ascending order. So what does that mean? We won't have the same issue that we just ran into before. At least I don't think we will. So letter B comes first, or comes before, and of course we do. Shouldn't have spoke too soon or too confidently there. And so we'll start to see other values for the field city in ascending sort order after at a certain 121 records, we'll start to see other values. Moving on to the column aliases examples, just want to show you that you can put column aliases in the order by clause as SQL supports it, because ultimately we're telling SQL how to order the output, right? And so when we select the first top 100 records for the field address ID, state province ID, and city, this is the example from the PowerPoint, provide column aliases for state code, provide an alias of state underscore code for the state province ID field, and then also an alias of city underscore name for the field city. We can ultimately refer to those alias names within our order by clause. And so here, state province ID reflects the original field name, and city underscore name reflects the alias for the field city. And so when we run this, we'll see state province ID sorted in ascending order, so 1 comes first, and then your city name sorted in descending order. So this was slightly different from the example we showed above, where we ordered results in ascending order. So in descending order, E is going to come before C, and we can see that in the output the output ultimately reflects what's in the select list, right? Even though we ordered by state province ID, we still see the state code as the column alias in the output. But we ultimately use city name as the column name in the order by clause, even though it was an alias for the original field. And so just to show you that they all work, right? If we change the way that we refer to the column alias, because there's a few ways to refer to them syntactically, you'll see that we continue to get the same result. And so gives you more flexibility. It's not required to actually use use column aliases, but again, it might be useful when your select list gets much larger and more difficult to copy and paste, multiple lines and put them in an order by, when they might also appear in a where and a group by. So just something to think about.